This is the new Mclaren Artura. It sits above the GT and below the 720S in the McLaren range, costing £185,500. And although at first glance it has a very familiar look, it really is new. No more of that V8, instead a plug-in hybrid powertrain with a new V6 and an electric motor. That means outputs of 671 brake horsepower and 531 pounds-foot of torque. This can drive around on battery power only for nearly 20 miles and up to 80 miles an hour. 0 to 62 miles an hour, 3 seconds dead. 0 to 124 miles an hour, 8.3 seconds, and it will do 205 miles an hour flat out. But you'd expect all that. It's a supercar. They're all plenty quick enough. What you're thinking is, well, it's hybrid, so it's going to be heavy. But no, they've saved weight all over the car, starting with the new carbon fibre monocoque, which is built up in their new factory in Sheffield. Yes, it weighs 82 kilos, which is 6 kilos more than the one you'd have found on the 570S, but that includes the section for the batteries. And like for like, it's lighter as well as stronger because now it includes the B-pillars and various fixings for hinges on the doors and pickup points elsewhere. 6 kilos have been saved in the doors themselves, 8 kilos have been saved with the seats. The engine, 50 kilos lighter, that new V6. The wiring loom itself, it's a new Ethernet wiring loom which requires less wiring and is 10% lighter. The end result is the fact that although the whole hybrid architecture adds 140 kilos, 88 kilos of that being in the batteries, which is situated low down just behind the seats underneath the fuel tank. This car weighs just 46 kilos more than a 570S. A din weight of 1498 kilos, a dry weight of 1395 kilos. For some perspective, the din weight of a basic 992 Carrera is 1505 kilos. Pretty impressive, I think you'll agree. One of the other ways this has saved weight is by keeping it rear-wheel drive, no power to the front wheels like in the Honda NSX or Ferrari's SF90. Now I want to talk about that V6 engine, but before we leave the front of the car, I think it's worth taking a moment for the overall design because yes, it's more of an evolution than a revolution, but there are all sorts of details in it. It's all at once cleaner because you've got things like, if you just have a look here, this here now, there's no brake here, so you get this amazing sort of stretched, taut look across the top of the car with these buttresses which actually feed air in at the bottom of them. And then you've got details that aren't quite as clean. So you've got these vents here which actually alleviate the pressure from in the arches but also then feed the air down the side of the car. The lights, well, we've got the recognisable socket headlights now, so which we first saw on the 720S, but you've also got the shape there with a graphic, I suppose, which is so well known from McLaren's. Moving back round to the front, you've got a sensor down the front now for adaptive cruise control, and we've also got the sensor in the windscreen you can see up there which recognises the signs, and also we've got automatic high beam for the first time. Little things that haven't been available on McLaren's before, perhaps not sort of, they're not groundbreaking as such, but things that should make this car easier to live with as well as being fast. One thing, single wiper, and no nozzles either. I love single wipers. There's just something very motorsport about them, isn't there? The colour? Flux green, which brings us on really to that powertrain. The Artura uses an axial flux motor, which is small enough to be located within the gearbox's bell housing. It weighs just 15.4 kilos, which is less than half that of the 38 kilo radial flux e-motor in the McLaren P1. And in fact, the only other supercar application of an axial flux motor that we've seen so far is in the back of Ferrari's SF90. It can put out 94 brake horsepower and 166 pounds-foot of torque, although that maximum power is transient, dropping to 49 brake horsepower after 15 seconds of full throttle. Should be enough. The new M630 engine is a 120-degree all-aluminium V6 with the ball-bearing turbo sitting in the V, a dry sump and electric wastegates. It will rev to 8,500 RPM, puts out 577 brake horsepower and 431 pounds-foot of torque. It's called a hot V for a reason, and you can see the powertrain chimney that will vent hot air up through the rear deck. The new 8-speed dual-clutch transmission is 40mm shorter than the old 7-speed, and there is no reverse gear as the E-motor simply rotates in the opposite direction. For this reason, the battery is never allowed to fully discharge. As well as being charged via the combustion engine while driving, the 7.4 kWh battery can be charged to 80% in 2.5 hours via a standard EVSE cable. Under WLTP testing, it should achieve over 50 mpg and emit 129 grams per kilometre of CO2. Of course, that fuel economy does rather depend on what mode you're in. Pure EV mode I've already mentioned. Comfort mode still shuts off the combustion engine at small throttle openings and below 25 miles an hour. Sport and track then deploy the E-motor increasingly aggressively, with pure performance in mind, boosting low-end response and acceleration with torque infill. In fact, the Artura's throttle response is said to be twice that of McLaren's non-hybrid cars. So there we are, that's a few more details about the powertrain in this car. One of the big unknowns obviously is how that V6 will sound through these exhausts. Now, high level up here to clear the diffuser down there. I love around the back of here, just this super clean rear deck of the car, all of which actually, so this car has got 50 kilos of downforce overall compared to a previous sports series, the 570S, which was sort of downforce neutral. Which brings me on to the handling, because how is all that power and torque going to be translated onto the road? What's it going to feel like to drive on road or track? Well, one of the big things that they're talking about is down here. It's the rear suspension. So they've gone to a multi-link setup, so you've still got the fixed rear wishbone at the top, but you've got a multi-link setup down at the bottom, and you've got a particularly aggressive toe link on this. The reason for this is basically to increase camber stiffness and particularly toe stiffness. The reason for that, well, how I had it described to me is on the road, if you are going down, say, those sort of width-restricted lanes on the motorway or autobahn or auto route, and you know when you sit in those for ages and it's just, particularly in a wide car where you're sitting there and it's a bit nervous and you're sort of thinking, oh, I just want to, it feels like it's wandering around a bit and you're constantly having to work at the steering just to keep it within that lane. That's generally because you haven't got enough toe stiffness in the rear. Now, on a track, how it manifests itself, well, that I know well, because in a 570S, if you were going around a track, I remember particularly at Goodwood, quickly fast track, and you're coming off throttle as you turn in, or if you brake to turn in, then you had a really loose feeling rear end, which I happen to really, really like, but I completely understand that not everybody did. So what they've done is basically try to make the rear end of this car much more stable than it was in the previous sports series. Now you might think, well, that sounds a bit dull, but what it's also been able to enable them to do is add grip in other areas. So we have a shorter wheelbase, obviously giving greater agility, so it's 30mm shorter than a 720S or the previous sports series. We've also got wider tyres, so we've got a wider tyre at the front. It's gone up from 225 to 235, and then at the rear we've now got a 295 as opposed to 285. Steering also, that's slightly sort of, they've gone stiffer, more aggressive, more like 600 LT before, which you wouldn't have wanted to do obviously with the old 570S or sports series, because if you add in the agility at the front and then you've got the loose rear, well, it's just a recipe for, well, perhaps not disaster, but an awful lot of fairly overactive oversteer. The other big thing around the back of the car, which they're trumpeting in terms of handling, is the E-diff. Now, you might remember that McLaren up to now, famously really, mostly because of, I think, Chris Goodwin, who was against having a limb slip diff in the cars, they haven't had a limb slip diff. Now they have this E-diff. And what that's given them is, well, more options really. Again, it helps give you stability in the car, but it should also help you in drift. So they're saying this is more driftable, sort of not just on the way out of the corners, but on the way in as well. So if you think of the E-diff gives you all sorts of options in terms of being able to open it and close it at various points in the corner. So if you're going into the corner, you'd have it closed, so you give yourself more stability under braking. Then as you get to the apex, you want to open it right out, so you get that sort of ability to just rotate the car at the apex of the corner. And then of course you want it locking up as you sort of pile on the power and drive out of the corner. Also, when you're sliding the car, the diff, if you've got it sort of working really well, obviously, then it should just give you a bit more progression, because sometimes McLaren's, it worked really well before. I'm not going to say that sort of suddenly not having a diff didn't work, because it did. It worked really well with their use of sort of, you know, brake management, but it should just mean that particularly I think those smaller angles of drift and where it starts, that's where you should notice the difference in this. So there we are. That's a bit on the ride and handling. Oh, I suppose dampers, I should really mention those. This has got the proactive damper control, so that we saw first on the McLaren GT. So that's sort of, it doesn't exactly read the road like a camera, but it does react to whatever is underneath it via all the various sensors over the car. Anyway, I think it's time we went and had a look inside. While I'm ensconcing myself in the cockpit, I should just mention the brakes, which are carbon ceramic discs measuring 390mm at the front and 380mm at the rear. They're clamped by aluminium calipers from the same family as the system used on the 600LT and 720S. A bespoke.
Mate, the way the E-motor comes in, ooh, how could you get bored of this? Coming in hot. Ooh. This is the bit I really love. EV mode. How awesome is that? Complete silence. Sounds so good.
What was the brief? The brief was to design an all-new McLaren hybrid supercar. What did that mean technically? Well, all-new architecture, all-new hybrid powertrain, all-new aero, improved cooling, improved visibility, improved ergonomics, and exquisite design execution, all whilst keeping weight to a minimum. We guided the look and feel with 3 key phrases, the first of which was purity. Now, not just purity of line, but purity through the integration of components. This enabled us to achieve this very clean, pure aesthetic, but also the integration of components meant we were able to reduce the weight, and in turn, reducing the weight means Artura will rewrite the rulebook and just how engaging an electrified supercar can be. Then we have technical sculpture. Stunning to look at, but there for a reason. And just like the forms we see in nature, which have been carved by elements, Artura is the result of the forces around it. And finally, we have functional jewellery. We don't decorate our cars, we take what you need and make it beautiful. And Artura has classic supercar proportions, that long, low, sleek nose, compact wheelbase with staggered wheel sizes to 19-inch at the front, 20-inch at the rear. This very rakish, sleek roofline and a cabin that's sunk down between these high, peaked fenders. Those features, coupled with this very compact, short rear overhang, give the car a visual energy like it's ready to accelerate or leap forwards even when it's stood still. And then moving around to the rear, we have the full-width laser-cut mesh designed to optimise the cooling across the rear zone. Set into that, we have these ultra-slim almond-shaped LED light blades, very characterful and ultra-high-tech. In the middle, the twin exhausts, lightweight solution, but also sounds absolutely fantastic. The approach on the interior is the same. It's all about purity, and we've created a driver-focused environment using lightweight luxury materials. And we've taken that driver-focused concept to an all-new level. Not only do you have the screen angled towards you here, but we've now mounted the binnacle and the dynamic controls onto the columns. That means as you find your perfect driving position, you always maintain perfect visibility of the instrumentation. It means you can keep your hands on the wheel, your eyes on the road, and you can then engage and have fun with the dynamic setup of the car. And then we have the seats. Here we're showing the Club Sport seat, single piece, lightweight back shell with adjustability. But you can also option the comfort seat, which has multi-way adjustability. Once you've chosen your seat, then think about the overall look and feel for the interior, and there's 3 key specifications you can choose from. First of which is performance, mean and moody with hot accents. You then have Tech Lux, which uses lighter material combinations but a large volume of leather. And then we have Vision, the interior we have in the car right here, using very modern, fresh combinations of both colours and materials, but it still maintains that very sporty, dynamic feel.
To hit our high-level objectives for the Artura programme, we had to start with a clean sheet of paper to design and develop what we're calling MCLA, the McLaren Carbon Lightweight Architecture. This, of course, starts with an all-new carbon tub. But in fact, MCLA is much more than just a tub. It's the chassis hardpoints, it's the crash structures, and it's an all-new electrical architecture, one that's allowed us to add features like adaptive cruise control and Apple CarPlay. MCLA will underpin our next generation of McLaren models. Most importantly, MCLA is optimised to work with our all-new high-performance hybrid powertrain and exploits McLaren's core competitive advantage when it comes to electrification, which is lightweighting. MCLA has been designed hand in hand with our all-new high-performance hybrid powertrain. At its heart is an entirely new 3-litre V6 engine with a pretty unusual 120-degree V-angle, of course featuring direct injection. The hybrid system, while there to deliver that P1 driving experience, is in fact completely new. It features a bespoke axial flux motor and a lithium-ion energy-dense battery. Together, the high-performance hybrid powertrain delivers 680 PS of power and 720 Newton-meters of torque. And 95 PS of that power comes from the electric motor. The hybrid powertrain provides around 30 kilometres of emissions-free EV running and contributes to emissions of just 129 grams per kilometre. Let's talk about performance for a second. 0 to 200 kilometres an hour in just 8.3 seconds. That's just a tenth off the performance of our hardcore 600 LT model, and it doesn't stop accelerating until it hits 330 kilometres per hour. I mentioned earlier that our mission with Artura was to add the benefits of a high-performance hybrid powertrain, but without the weight penalty you'd normally expect with this type of technology. Well, I'm really pleased to say it's a mission we've absolutely delivered on, with Artura weighing just 1498 kilos din and just 1395 kilos dry. We've retained our hydraulic steering system for the best possible feedback. This is matched with an all-new stiff suspension system that really maximises control of the contact patch, and this is paired with our proactive damping control to provide absolute fantastic body control, but without compromising ride comfort. And a first for McLaren is the use of an E-differential. Incorporated into that new 8-speed transmission, this enhances control, agility and cornering performance. To summarise, Artura very much represents our, and possibly even the, next generation supercar. It uses the very latest technology to provide a versatile and engaging driving experience.